Hello. In this video, I'm going to give a view on a paper called Dynamic Capabilities at IBM, Strategy in Action. It's by Bruce Harreld, Charles O'Reilly and Michael Tushman, and the article appeared in the Californian Management Review in 2007. Now, dynamic capabilities as a theory start from the same place as the resource-based view, in that it is the resources of the organisation that give it competitive advantage. But such advantages, it argues, are only temporary, and hence sustainable competitive advantage is gained from the ability the organisation has to deploy, upgrade and renew its competence and resource base. Now, understanding of this view of strategy is hindered by the lack of consistent language used by the various authors and by the differences in the definitions of what constitutes a dynamic capability. There is even variation as to whether dynamic capabilities are a separate theory or a development of RBV. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to adopt the view that dynamic capabilities are a different way of looking at competitive advantage. This, I've found, makes these two theories much more usable by practitioners. And as throughout this video series, we then worry about synthesis in the use of the outputs in making more robust decisions. The reason I've chosen Harreld, O'Reilly and Tushman's article is that the examples used from IBM help us to see what dynamic capabilities are. And so when engaging with more theoretical dynamic capability articles, you come from a better position. I will cover at least one of these in a later video. No doubt, this more practical view is held by Bruce Harreld, being the Senior Vice President of Marketing and Strategy at IBM at the time that the paper was published. I do have to stress that the detail given on IBM here is what is presented in the paper, and this might not be representative of what happens in IBM today. So, turning to the article. After a brief introduction, Harreld, O'Reilly and Tushman start by reviewing current thinking about strategy and their view about why dynamic capabilities are an improvement. To them, the fundamental question in the field of strategic management is how firms achieve and sustain competitive advantage, but that there is not consensus about how this is achieved. With this in mind, the authors characterize strategy theories into four main paradigms, schools of thought, if you like. The first one they describe is Michael Porter's view that advantage comes from the actions taken by the firm to create a defensible position against competitors. You can see the video on Michael Porter's 5 forces and what is strategy elsewhere. The second paradigm, they say, is the resource-based view, where advantage comes from difficult to imitate specific assets of the firm. Again, you can see the Barney 1991 article and Prahalad and Hamel's 1990 paper summarised elsewhere. These two views the authors describe as static and say they emphasise how the firm competes at a single point in time, although I'm sure proponents of these two views would dispute this. The third distinct approach, they say, emphasises a strategic conflict approach, maybe using game theory to suggest how firms outsmart their rivals. This view emphasises the strategic moves firms make. While not evident in the article, we might broaden this perspective to include the blue ocean strategy of Kim and Mulburn. See the article on that, summarised elsewhere. Harreld and his co-authors introduced dynamic capabilities as the fourth paradigm. They say this builds on the notion of core competencies, but focuses on the role of managers in building and adapting these competencies to address changing environments. So explicitly acknowledging that as markets and technologies evolve, firms need to adjust by reallocating assets and learning new skills. In that, it is senior managers' ability to sense change in the competitive environment and act to seize opportunities by reconfiguring its resources. Now, theories of strategy can be very elegant in their formation, but less helpful in practice. Similarly, in many organisations, strategy becomes an academic, ritualistic exercise divorced from the day-to-day operations of a firm. Harreld and his co-authors describe how this was true in IBM in the mid-1990s. Harreld and his co-authors describe how this was true in IBM in the mid-1990s, and then for the rest of the article focus on how it changed its approach to strategy and created routines that gave it dynamic capabilities. In 1993, in the face of looming disaster, Lou Gerstner replaced John Ackers as CEO. After stabilising the company in the mid-1990s, Gerstner looked to the future. The resulting bet was to orientate the company to provide solutions that solve customers' business problems by integrating technology from various suppliers. So transitioning from a traditional hardware company into a service business. This meant it needed to take its existing competencies in specific technologies and quality and add to them the capacity to serve customers, to integrate the organisation around customer needs and solving customer problems. This meant walking away from a lot of IBM's history and many of the existing competencies that were out of step with the market realities that were emerging. Now, the individual routines to enable changes in the firm's competencies will vary from firm to firm depending on their resource portfolio and the path they have followed to acquire them, so-called path dependency. For instance, elsewhere you will see examples like Canon's high-level committees orchestrating the development and mobilisation of the firm's resources. Similarly, Cemex with its global networks. But in this article, Harreld and his fellow authors suggest the most important element in the case of IBM was a radical shift in its approach to strategic insight and strategic execution. They particularly focus on how strategy as a function was transformed. Prior to Gerstner, the strategy process in IBM looked pretty much like any large complex organisation. External and technology developments were monitored and there was an annual strategy review process. The strategic plan documents produced were rolled together into what was called the Spring Plan. In Gerstner's view, it was not what the business needed and certainly not a blueprint for action. In the redesign that took shape, the IBM business leadership model emerged. This pushed greater involvement of IBM's general managers in both the process of strategic insight and in strategic execution. ensuring every strategic initiative had an associated plan for execution. In this, it was not a top-down annual process, but an ongoing engagement across the more than 25,000 general managers in IBM, both in the formulation and in the execution of strategy. Now, the article steps through the business model, describing each element in depth. Please see the article to see more of that. To underpin this model, and so ensure the strategy process provided the insight necessary to sense opportunities and the execution needed to seize them, a complementary set of mechanisms evolved to grasp new opportunities. Harreld, O'Reilly and Tushman step through these mechanisms, characterizing them as either being sensing or being seizing dynamic capabilities. Under the sensing new opportunities and generating strategic insight, the authors cluster, firstly, IBM's monthly meetings of the technology team, a team made up of IBM fellows and distinguished engineers that assesses the market readiness and potential of emerging technologies and link these to business needs. The team can take decisions that can accelerate or cut funding to new technology projects. The second mechanism they talk about is the strategy team in IBM. Now, this was changed to be made up of both general managers who joined the team for an 18 to 30 month period and strategy professionals. Now, this team held formal monthly meetings with a cross-section of general managers and other functional leaders to examine market results of existing units and to explore new growth areas. Decisions from these meetings result in the shifting of resources to enable market entry, to adjust plans, or even enact the complete exit from a business. There's far more detail in the article about how the strategy team functioned, and that's well worth our look at. It covers many of the things I did try to do as a practitioner. The third sensing mechanism is the integrations and values team. This is a group of 300 key leaders selected annually by the Chief Executive Officer and other senior leaders. Group managers considered to be responsible for integrating IBM through a set of company-wide initiatives known as winning ways. Each initiative is assigned a leader with progress reported quarterly to the entire team and summarised to the whole organisation. The fourth mechanism are deep dives. This is a structured process requested by general managers when confronting a performance or an opportunity gap. The deep dives are staffed jointly by the operating unit and by the strategy team. They are an intensive fact-based process in which the issue identified is scrutinised in great detail. These events result in a strategic decision to pursue a technology or a market, to change strategy, or even to exit a market. Now, these four mechanisms, the authors claim, provide a multifaceted way of continuously monitoring and assessing changes, and a way to allocate resources in support of these decisions. Moving to the sensing mechanisms, that is, routines to reallocate resources and reconfigure the organisation, asset orchestration, if you like. Now, as well as the integrations and values team with its winning ways we talked about earlier, Harreld and co-authors highlight three mechanisms. Firstly, an integrated set of emerging business opportunities, EBOs, processes, incentives and structures. The recognition that well-established businesses operate differently from new exploratory ones led to a process for establishing separate new organisations with their own leadership and funding. Typically these are focused on business opportunities, so not just a new technology or a product upgrade. Business opportunities that require significant cross-organisational integration. The EBOs are reviewed monthly by a senior sponsor against set milestones. If successful, the experiment is rolled back into the existing businesses. Others will fail and other EBOs replace them. The next seizing mechanism highlighted are IBM Strategic Leadership Forums, SLFs. These are 3.5-day intensive team-based workshops built around specific performance or opportunity gaps, the output of which is an action plan to address that issue. These forums are not typical off-site gatherings, but, according to the authors, are intensely focused, often emotional debates about the future of a business. Their aim is to solve a major strategic problem in those 3.5 days. This approach is then cloned down to mini SLFs throughout the company. Then the final seizing mechanism is IBM's Corporate Investment Fund. This was developed as a way to provide funding to new initiatives identified by either the Integration and Values team or as EBOs. At the time, $500 million fund was taken from existing business unit budgets with funding decisions made each quarter. By providing central funding to new initiatives, they were not starved by existing profit centre managers focused on meeting local plans. So, two sets of mechanisms driving the generation of insights and strategy implementation, sensing and seizing new business opportunities. Harreld, O'Reilly and Tushman recognise that many organisations will have several of these elements, but claim that IBM is different in the way they are integrated and take a systemic view in realising new opportunities. The authors finish the article re-emphasising that in transforming IBM, the real change required was for the company to reallocate resources and reconfigure itself in a different way. This, the authors say, is the essence of dynamic capabilities. Often, strong inertial forces limit changes. In IBM's case, it was walking away from its history. And this requires managers to see things differently and to be willing to cannibalise existing businesses. And as the authors say, this requires the combination of complementary repeatable routines to promote strategic insight and link that insight to execution. Thus, they say, dynamic capabilities are not an abstract academic concept, but a concrete set of mechanisms that help managers to sense and seize opportunities. So what do we make of this article by Harreld, O'Reilly and Tushman? Well, I like it because it does start to make tangible what dynamic capabilities are and give us real examples of mechanisms that comprise them. I also find in teaching and practice that treating dynamic capabilities as a separate theory rather than trying to blur the boundary with RBV gives greater clarity and makes the concept a more useful lens. Of course, I would encourage anyone in strategy to also be looking at issues through other lenses like Core RBV at the same time. It is worth commenting that this is just one view of dynamic capabilities. Others have a different take, even on categorization. So rather than just sensing and seizing types of dynamic capabilities, we have integration, learning and reconfiguration dynamic capabilities. Or for other authors, adaptive, absorbative and innovative dynamic capabilities. But in all cases, the important point is that these are processes or routines that act on the resource base of the firm, and it is by the ability to continually create new unique resources that sustainable competitive advantage is gained. Thank you.